Welcome to the Black Gay History Channel. Please share this video and subscribe to this channel for more captivating content. Malcolm X was one of the most prominent and influential civil rights leaders in American history, whose legacy has become ingrained in global Black culture and the humanitarian movement of racial equality. Because of his close ties to the Nation of Islam, a Black American religious and political organization founded on the tenets of Islam. His history of same-sex relationships has been underreported and flat-out denied by those who wish to uphold a particular conservative idealization of his legacy. Over the years, though, more and more evidence has mounted about Malcolm X's queer sexual relationships and his unwillingness to talk about them after he converted to Islam while in prison in 1948. But many biographers have more than enough evidence after speaking with many people in Malcolm X's youth that have confirmed his sexual encounters with men. Born Malcolm Little in 1925, his parents were active in their communities, collaborating with the Black rights organization UNIA, or the Universal Negro Improvement Association, that was founded by Jamaican-American Black rights leader Marcus Garvey. Even I, as a Caribbean American, forget that Malcolm X has ties to the Caribbean as well. His mother, Louise Helen Little, originally hailing from Grenada. His foundation clearly stuck with the future leader and helped form his base of pro-Black ideals that served him later in adulthood. According to two extensive biographers, it was clear that in his youth Malcolm Little engaged in several same-sex relationships. Many who knew Malcolm through his teen years blatantly said that Little carried himself like a sissy and had sexual encounters with boys and girls that were known about in the various towns his family had moved from, particularly Boston, then Harlem, New York. After losing his father at an early age and going to the foster system after his mother suffered mental health decline, Little turned to the streets to survive. Manning Marable's biography, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, as well as Bruce Perry's biography, Malcolm, The Life of a Man Who Changed Black America, both chronicle his relationship with a wealthy white businessman, William Paul Lennon, in 1946. It seemed that on occasion, Little would head to Lennon's home in Boston and perform sexual favors to men in exchange for money, something he even confessed to his half-sister Ella after he got caught up in trouble with the police for their illegal interactions. In another instance, a close friend who at one time lived with Malcolm in Harlem later spoke in interviews about his seemingly intimate relationship with Miss Jones, a neighbor who lived in their apartment building who was called Miss Jones but was actually born male. Now, we don't know whether this neighbor lived full-time as a woman, identified as a woman, or merely just occasionally dressed up in women's clothes, but Malcolm was known to sleep over with Miss Jones for several nights, and it seemed obvious enough for this old roommate to confidently mention that their relationship was sexual. With so much conversation going on about LGBTQ youth and how we should treat them, I think it's noteworthy that Malcolm X was undoubtedly a queer street kid, someone that many people even today would look down upon, and would never imagine this young person could become an influential civil rights leader. These conversations and Malcolm X's queerness is an important part of his story, even if he wasn't equipped to tell it. If the average Christian or Muslim Black parent can see their own young queer teens as the next Malcolm X, then maybe they would think twice before throwing them out on the streets to fend for themselves. 40% of homeless youth in the U.S. today identify as LGBTQ, and as we know, many like Malcolm Little never openly identified with these labels, whether they may be fitting or not. In jail, Malcolm X would convert to Islam and renounce his old way of life, which in his eyes was a way of sin that included drinking and drugs, theft, and most likely his sexual life with men as well. He would later go on to describe his spiritual life before conversion as being trapped or lost. Now, no one is saying that Malcolm X ever identified as gay or bisexual, but we also know that many powerful men have hidden their queer identities and past to sustain their heteronormative image, especially in religious spaces. While it's possible that Malcolm completely left his sexual connections to men in his past, we do know that many men who have same-sex desires just continue to have their gay sex lives in secret and away from their families. There's another bit of information I found out about Malcolm X's life that I think is very telling in this conversation. In 2017, a verified letter from Malcolm X to his mentor Elijah Muhammad, leader of the Nation of Islam, was made public. In the letter, Malcolm X plainly confesses that his marriage to his wife, Betty Shabazz, was in jeopardy because of their lackluster sex life. It turned out that Betty Shabazz was very frank in telling Malcolm X that his performance in bed was lacking, and that she had never been sexually satisfied. In this letter, written in 1959, Shabazz blatantly called Malcolm impotent, and he even insinuated that Shabazz threatened to cheat on him if things didn't get better. Even though he was saddened and embarrassed by what his wife had to say, it seemed he understood and needed guidance on how to satisfy his wife. When someone is convinced that their queer identity is innately sinful, it may never cross their mind that maybe their issues with the opposite gender in bed may be due to their lack of attraction to their spouse. Though the pair had 6 children together, Betty Shabazz made it clear with him that she never enjoyed their sex life, enough to even threaten their marriage. Now, we know that straight men can also struggle with impotency and performance issues in bed, but not considering his queer identity in this conversation is like trying to ignore all the signs in front of our faces. The pressures to not just be a figurehead of the Black Revolution and the spiritual movement based in Islam meant there was nearly no way that Malcolm X could live out his gay attractions in a healthy way, and he chose to live a straight life. Though many people from Malcolm X's family have denounced these facts about his life, their arguments are usually very hollow, because the people who knew him growing up have a different view of the figurehead. I also see a correlation here between many Black queer men's perceptions of gay intimacy and sin. Many who try to leave their same-sex desires also equate these relationships with alcohol, drugs, and outright criminal behavior because they've been taught by their religious families all these things are synonymous. Isolation and lack of community has been proven to drive people to substance use. But what usually comes first? The drug use or the homophobic isolation and abuse we endure from our families when they find out about us in our youth? With religious extremism and racist and homophobic terror attacks rising in so many countries with large Black populations, I think it's time we start ripping off these metaphoric band-aids and continue telling these historic truths to our own communities to stop the spread of hate and disunity. While we can all respect Malcolm X for his contributions to the movement of racial equality, we can also be honest about the fact that he was a queer man whose religious beliefs most likely affected his relationships, and the homophobia is not something to be celebrated in Black culture. Malcolm X being called a sissy in his youth is not something to be celebrated, and we shouldn't be speaking to any of the young Black children of this generation in that way either. It's time we move forward as a Black collective, and yes, Black, gay, bisexual, pansexual, gender nonconforming, same gender-loving men and youth can in fact see themselves in Malcolm X and his legacy advocating for community justice. Because the truth is, Malcolm was a queer youth who became a beloved hero of a nation and the world.